The film tells a beautiful love story that inspired a nation. And it didn't just inspire a nation to be on side when it comes to this couple, but it inspired a nation that eventually gained its independence because of their leader, Seretse Khama, and that's hugely important. You know, it was interesting when I first came across the project, which was through David Oyelowo, because I hadn't heard of it before. I hadn't heard of Seretse Khama. I hadn't heard of Ruth Williams before. And for me, one of the things that hit me, apart from the fact that it is obviously a great love story, was the fact that it was a story of African independence, but also the might of the unity when it came to the couple. You know, the fact that this could have been an ordinary love story where you just show how two people get together. But actually what you saw is what happens once they get together and the might of an empire is against them, and how they prove that their might was stronger. You know, on the one hand, the couple were probably so love-struck that they didn't really understand the consequences of what they were doing. You know, the idea that an African man of influence, a king of a nation, you know, part of Botswana, was going to take home his queen from England, not just an outsider to his country, but a white queen, in a world where really what most people from Botswana, or Bechuanaland, as it was called at that time, understood of white people was that they were colonialists. So the idea that he was going to bring one home, you know, to be their queen, obviously was one major obstacle. I think it isn't just that stories like this have been airbrushed from history, but I think that they have often been told from a completely different perspective. And so what happens is when they're told from a perspective where oftentimes the people who are possibly really the heroes of the story or really the center of the stories don't get a chance to see those stories told through their gaze, you get a different kind of history. And I think that's the one thing. I think the other reason why you should make any period drama full stop, I think, is that oftentimes they show us how far we've come, but also how far we still have to go. And I think they offer us a measure, they offer us a benchmark for which we can measure not only who we are today, who we were yesterday, but who we might want to become in the future. I think that's really important. The fact that we can now add Seretse Khama alongside Nelson Mandela is a really great thing, I think. He represents strength, he represents principles, he represents leadership. You know, one of the questions I really wanted to pose with this film is, what does it mean to be a leader? What is a leader? Is a leader a ruler? Or is a leader somebody who's in service to their people? And for me, Seretse was in service to his people, and the fact that he fell in love with an outsider didn't necessarily mean that he should abandon his people or that he should have lost any care or love or bond that he had with these people. And I think the fact that he married an outsider made him possibly go even further to prove his connection with his own people as well. Whenever I'm concentrating on these stories that have a sort of big world story attached to them, I really try and focus on the detail of the individual, on the intimate story of the individual, whilst obviously also inevitably telling the bigger story that they have an impact on. So I was conscious that I was contributing to his legacy, but what I really wanted to do was just doing justice as a human being, as someone who existed, someone who loved, someone who became a father, and yes, ultimately someone who became a leader, but it was concentrating on the detail of the man. Otherwise, I think it can become a bit daunting, a bit overwhelming when you realise you're telling somebody this important story. I've known David for the best part of 2 decades, or almost 20 years, and The fact that we are both of African parents, we were both raised in the UK, this story means so much to both of us. It means that I have to say that for me, it's his most powerful performance. For me, he plays a man who's very recognisable. I didn't grow up with African leaders around me, but I grew up with African men of dignity around me and of intellect and of the type that we're often starved of seeing on screen. So in seeing David play this role, it speaks very much to my heart. And of course, when I see him, I recognise him, and if I recognise him, it means he's giving a great performance. He's real. This was a really, really important story for him. It was a really important part for him to play. And he was able to hand all of that over to me and say, give us your vision.